Good morning. This is the New Thought and World Religion class for December 24th, Christmas Eve. And today we are going to be talking about deconstructing the Nativity. I actually wanted to start though, I think that a lot of people here did go to the candlelight service, which is the Nativity as well, the story. And I know I really like, it's one of my favorite services, I really like it. And I was going to make a recommendation at the beginning. This book is called Your Hope of Glory, and it goes through the Gospels, and it is just the metaphysical interpretation of those sections. So if you liked the sort of the devotional metaphysical interpretation of the Christmas story, the rest of the Gospel also has a metaphysical interpretation that you can find in this book. And this is by Elizabeth Sand Turner, and it's called Your Hope of Glory. And Elizabeth Sand Turner has several books. Let There Be Light goes over the Hebrew scriptures. And then Be Transformed is the rest of the Christian scriptures other than the Gospels, which is found in this book. So I recommend all three of them if you're interested in sort of the metaphysical interpretation, which is not what we're going to do today. But it's something that I find very valuable in my spiritual practice.
Is that a Unity book?
This is a Unity book. Yeah, all of the Elizabeth Sand Turner books are Unity books. And like I said, I really enjoy them. And if you liked the candlelight service, you'll probably like that book. But we are going to be deconstructing, and so we'll go ahead and start talking about that. And I wanted to start out with a few reminders about deconstruction, like what is deconstruction? We talked about a little bit last week, and then this week I wanted just to remind everyone, from the beginning of the deconstruction series, is that deconstruction does not aim at providing answers. Like that's not really the goal for deconstruction. It does not seek to prove any objective truth or to support any one particular claim to justice over another, right? So what that means is that deconstruction isn't really an end. Deconstruction is kind of like a denial in Unity. A denial when we're not denying reality, but we're denying anything other than God's existence or anything other than the good. That's not an end in itself. And so I wanted to make that a little bit clear is when we're deconstructing things like the Nativity, this is just to help us sort of untangle maybe some false beliefs that we have about a particular story, or some indoctrination that we experienced when we were younger. That's how I tend to use deconstruction. Is I look at the historical critical context within a story, and it helps me to go, wait a minute, there's more to this. Like there's more, and I can look at it in a different way. So. And we'll just start out by reviewing a couple things that we talked about when I finally got to the Nativity. But we're at the Nativity, so we're good to go. We talked about Joseph, and we talked about that Matthew and Luke, even though we tend to put these two stories together, they're really independent stories of each other. They're not really one story. So we kind of like in the candlelight service, we talked about the shepherds, and we also talked about the wise men. However, those were both distinct to each story, and each story is a standalone story. And they were written to different audiences. So we have Matthew, which was written to a Jewish audience, and so the narrative is for that audience. And then we have Luke, which was written to the Gentiles, and so that narrative is very specific to the Gentiles, or non-Jews. And that's why we have two different lineages. So apparently, and it's interesting because, a lot of the story is about Jesus having, being born of a virgin, which we did talk about a little bit and we'll address again today. But the lineage of Jesus is Joseph's lineage in both Gospels, but they are not the same. In Matthew, we have a royal lineage, and the royal lineage is symbolic of him being the king of the Jews. And in Luke, we have a priestly lineage, which was an invitation for spirituality to the Gentiles. And so that's the difference between the lineage and again, two very different stories that we kind of combine together. So the lineages are not the same. And then we have Mary as a betrothed virgin. In both stories, this shows up that way. And then we talked about, was Mary a virgin? And, we talked about the original word in Hebrew in the Septuagint was Alma. And Alma just meant young girl. However, in the Septuagint, it was translated into Greek as Parthenos, which is virgin. And so what we have is the original authors of the two nativity stories they had access to the Septuagint. So they read the mistranslation, and then they were like, oh, well, Jesus needed to be born of a virgin, and Mary became a virgin. And that's kind of how, that story happened. We also asked the question, did Mary ride a donkey? And that is not found in either gospel. Okay? And this is where we left off. We have angelic visitations in both gospels.
Are you taking comments?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you want to get him the microphone? Yeah, or this will be a 20-minute class. So, okay. Yeah.
There we go. Hello? There we go. Hello. I wasn't here last week. Okay. I didn't hear your but I tend to believe Mark more than I do any of the other Gospels, because Mark was the original Gospel that was written. Matthew and Luke both took from Mark about 50 to 70% of it. In Mark, there is no virgin birth.
Right.
In Mark, there is no Joseph.
Right.
So I have to question, any of that anyway. So.
Yeah, and the story, and he's right, and the story just keeps expanding as the gospel still goes. Mark, then Matthew, then Luke, and then John. We had one more hand. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you can just indulge me a moment and kind of help explain this. If she wasn't a virgin, why would we have the whole Joseph and interaction and them not married first and like all the...
Because it's a story.
It's not even really facts,
so
right?
the story was written in such a way to reflect what they believed was prophecy from the Hebrew scriptures. But the source text that they would have had when they were writing this story was the Septuagint, which had a mistranslation. And so they were looking at a mistranslation from young woman to virgin. And they were like, in the Septuagint it says virgin. And so they're like, well, Jesus has to be born of a virgin for this prophecy to be true. But then if you go back to the original Hebrew text, the oldest ones that we have, it doesn't say virgin.
Okay.
We have a comment way in the back, and then we can move up to Albie.
For her question, what I was taught is the story was to look sin-free from his beginning of his whole life. That's the main underlying concept that the Romans wanted to push.
So yeah, I would say that is something that I don't believe that was the concept that was being pushed when these were written. That was to develop
not of a father, but of the Father.
Right.
And there is a huge difference in the two.
Yeah.
And then
I think it was Origen though that developed that concept, right? Which would have been after these were written. So I wouldn't necessarily say that was the intended theological concept when these were written. That was developed afterward.
The only thing I'll say on that though is there's 32 versions of this story outside of Christianity. 32.
30. You mean like from other religions?
Yes.
Okay. That is definitely a myth that's been thrown around. I would push back. I mean, scholars do not agree that this particular, you're talking about like virgin birth story, that this virgin birth story is found in a similar way in other texts. Like that would not have been a source text.
Christianity is the only one that pushes its virginity.
Right. Yeah, and I know what you're talking about. Like, what was the name?
There were other stories from the past, way before Jesus, of virgin births.
Right.
And, so yes, I think that was adopted.
It was adopted. I don't know that those were necessarily used as source texts, like, when we're talking about the Egyptian stories, or they weren't source texts. Like most scholars, so back in I think like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that was a very popular thing to talk about. And there was even a film made about it. Zeitgeist was made, a documentary film made about how there were all of these different virgin births. But scholars today are saying, that's more of something that was added on later as people were kind of exploring more progressive Christianity, and not necessarily something that was an influence when these texts were written. And like I said, I'm not a biblical scholar, so like I don't know for certain, but from things that I have read, those tended to be added on late 1800s, early 1900s, or yeah. So.
So were the translations that you were talking about, were they from the Old Testament, from Isaiah, where it said he was a virgin, it was translated?
Yeah, in the Septuagint, the verse in Isaiah, in the original Hebrew, says young woman.
Okay.
And in the Greek translation, it says virgin.
Okay.
And so the people who wrote these two stories would have had access to that story. And that's when Jesus was born of a virgin, was, because they were developing a story to fulfill prophecy. So they were reading prophecy, and they were creating a story about the Messiah, about Jesus. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Cool. All right, so, and another thing I wanted to say is, so Matthew talks, if you read the book of Matthew, it talks all about the kingdom. The kingdom is the common narrative, whereas in Luke, it talks about the temple and access to the temple, especially for Gentiles, for women, for people out that were normally excluded from the temple. So those were the two different narratives. Like I said, Matthew was written to a Jewish audience, and Luke was written to a Gentile audience. So Luke was more the inclusive, like, Jesus is a Messiah that is inclusive to all people groups. So angelic visitations. So the real question is, did angels really appear? And it shows up in both books, both Luke and Matthew. And in Matthew, only one person sees angels, and that's Joseph. And he sees them in dreams. And in Luke, Zechariah, who was Jesus' uncle, sees a vision. And these were more visitations, not dreams, in the way that they're explained in the Bible. Mary, has a visitation. The shepherds see angels as they watch their flock by night. However, if you go into sort of the historical idea of understanding of what does it mean if someone sees an angel, does anybody know what that means? If it says the angel of the Lord appeared, or they have a visitation of angels, or does anybody know where that comes from? Like what they're referencing? So they are referencing, and I already mentioned these two, just a second. Luke's accounts, they're just talking about dreams. Anytime you hear, or you read in the Bible, or you hear somebody say, the angel of the Lord appeared, or, there's a great book called The Seven Keys. It's called Let There Be Light, and it's the Seven Keys, and it's interpretive qualities from people who understand the original language. And in the original language, the dreams were very important. 2/3 of the Bible is actually dreams, although they don't always use that language. Sometimes they use the language like the angel of the Lord appeared, which means somebody had a dream about something. And I know for me, when I found out 2/3 of the Bible was just a dream journal, that was huge, because I was like, wait a minute, okay, things make a little bit more sense here. It's just a dream journal, and that we don't necessarily always have to put so much weight and importance on somebody else's dreams, too. Does anybody have comments about angels? Oh, we have a comment in the back.
I was just going to say, one thing to remember on the dream journal is we don't know if that's a mistranslation either. I argue this translation thing to a hilt, because in World War II, the Nazis failed to translate Native American. And we're supposed to believe 4,000 years ago we were translating correctly.
Yeah, and I think that, scholars are definitely doing their best to come up with an English translation that is really relevant to the original language. And I actually have two favorites. I would highly recommend, especially if you're interested in studying the Bible. This study Bible is my favorite. It has essays in the back, it has maps, but then also if you go into each section, it has descriptions in the bottom from a historical critical context. So it helps you understand, maybe if there was a mistranslation. It tells you, it will put translations, or it will put brackets around certain scriptures and say, hey, this wasn't found in the original scriptures. And to help you kind of gauge if you're interested in studying the Bible. And then this translation, which I'll have at the end, I have a list of different books. This translation, the New Revised Standard Version, is probably my second favorite. My first favorite is the New Revised Standard Updated Version, which just came out last year, and it's probably the best translation that you can find without all of the different mistranslations or agendas. I mean, it's not that the Bible was just mistranslated, it's that there were people who were translating the Bible that had very specific agendas on what they wanted to communicate to the people, right? And so we have, leaders, we have emperors, we have, these churches, these, church hierarchies that translated the Bible to convey a very specific message that, upheld power.
There's actually 2 or 3 books that show that it was Roman influence because of the way they degraded Greek society in there.
Well, for sure, yeah.
There's definitely propaganda that's 4,000 years old.
Yeah, and there's the most dominant understanding of the Bible comes from the Roman Catholic Church, right? So, and Constantine definitely changed the whole nature of what we think of as Christianity. Constantinian Christianity, which is the dominant form of Christianity that we have today, was definitely political. When Christianity became the primary religion, and then we had, that's when we started having popes, and we have a different way of understanding Christianity today than they did back then. You didn't. What's that?
Or ever before.
Or ever before. Yeah. This idea that you choose to be Christian, that's not really the concept. You were already Christian. If you were a Roman citizen, you were a Christian, and then you could be excommunicated. Like, that's how Christianity worked. And now we have this. First, we have access to all of these other religions now. In terms of information, we have access to more information than we ever had in all of human history. And now we sort of have this idea that we pick being Christian, and then we go to a specific church, and all. That's all very new. Christianity was the state religion, which meant it was just as much a part of the political system as it was a spiritual system. And you could be kicked out of it, and you may have to buy penance to get back in. So I think that contextualizing it too, and understanding that how we view Christianity today is not how it was viewed. I mean, this is all very, very recent. A lot of it with the Protestant Reformation and all of that. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think today what we really need to understand is that how we resonate with a certain frequency as we're listening to what we're reading and what we're doing. We know that it is starting from my heart. That doesn't mean that your heart is the same as my heart. How you see something is what your truth is, and what my truth is my truth. The thing about my truth is it cannot hurt anybody else. I have to be able to find a truth that is going to be with everyone else's truth. I'm not trying to take anything from you. Does that make any sense?
No, that makes complete sense. And in fact, I think that you're probably referencing a more devotional approach to the Bible, which I right now I'm kind of talking about a deconstructed approach to the Bible. I do recommend, there's more people here, so I'm going to recommend it again. So if you went to the candlelight service and you really liked that, you would probably like this book called Your Hope of Glory, and it's by Elizabeth Sand Turner. It goes through the entire gospel, and it talks about the metaphysical story of the Bible. That is a more devotional approach, though. Whereas what we're doing here is we're talking about authority. So deconstruction is when we sort of just question, we ask ourselves about why we believe what we believe, and we look at the authority. But I highly recommend, too, this is one of my favorites when it comes to the biblical story from a metaphysical perspective, which is more of a devotional look at the Bible. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment. This is something I was talking to Sue about a couple days ago, especially after our our candlelight service, is that, I've been reading, like yourself, more biblical scholar, historical, critical analysis of what I believe might be really truth, coming from some of the early scribes, coming from what were they trying to convey here?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have what I consider more of the indoctrination type of part of Christianity. What are they trying to say now? And the thing that I love about Unity is the metaphysical kind of ties the two together.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives a loving way of applying, what was trying to be said before, what's trying to be said now, and going, hey, here's a loving approach.
Right.
That's what I love about Unity.
Yeah, and I love the devotion. Like, I still use the Bible devotionally. When I read it, I still use it devotionally. Deconstruction for me, though, first of all, if we live in a very Christian nation, I'm not saying that it's a Christian nation, but we are certainly influenced by Christianity, whether you're Christian or not, right? So deconstruction for me helps me untangle maybe some of the reasons why, some of the things I was indoctrinated with. Whereas in my devotional practice, when I'm reading the Bible for nourishment or using the Bible for nourishment, because I like just using certain passages from the Bible that have strong meaning for me, and I sort of meditate on those practices. So I kind of see them as both part of my personal spiritual journey, right? And there's lots of books that I use other than the Bible for the spiritual side. But I love that, and that's what I do like about Unity as well, is we can kind of see it from both sides. We can see the critical historic, what it does is it helps us sort of untangle those things. Like I was saying, it's kind of like the denial. And then the next step is the affirmation, which is ametaphysical, doesn't necessarily have to be unity. If you're going to use the Bible, you can use kind of both. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other comments about that?
Well, Unity from its beginning, they said, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
They said they were not a church.
Right, and they didn't really want to be.
They didn't want to be a church. No, they wanted to be a school.
Right. Yep. Okay, so Jesus. Move on. Okay, so Jesus was born in Bethlehem in both stories, and this is actually the fulfillment of a prophecy in Micah. So if you read the nativity narratives, Jesus and his family, they're jumping around everywhere. They're going to Egypt, they're going to, he's from Nazareth, going to Egypt, going to Bethlehem, all of these different places they're jumping around. And the main reason why they're jumping around is because they're reading these prophecies and they're like, we need to make this story to fulfill these prophecies. And so in Micah, it talked about Jesus being born in Bethlehem. But was Jesus born in a barn, a house, or a cave?
Depends on what book you're reading.
It definitely depends on what book you're reading, yeah. First of all, I want to address the cave, because the cave was not in either biblical narrative. It was actually Constantine. Talked about the influence that Constantine had on Christianity just now, but it was actually Constantine that created the narrative that Jesus was born in a cave. We don't hear that a lot here, but I think that the reason why is because we have a lot of Protestant, influence in America, so we don't necessarily hear the cave narrative. Go ahead.
When I was in Bethlehem, we went out to a cave, and they said that would be where the shepherds would have housed their animals. And so it was presented in Israel as a cave. But then we went into Bethlehem and had to go through an Eli door to get into the church. And I think, I don't know that was the only way to get in, but that's how they took us for the effect of the tour, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But in the church, you go in and you go down the stairs, and there's a star on the floor in the sub-basement of the church, which is actually divided into three churches. The Greek Orthodox, the Catholic, and the other Protestant denomination all have services up above. but you go down and there's a star, and it's supposed to be the spot where the manger was.
Mhm.
And that's in, of course now it's, because they built churches over everything in Israel where Jesus was supposed to have done anything in
Right.
the church. But they've got a star there where that was supposed to be. But we were shown the cave and said this was much more likely the kind of place where he would have been born.
So, and I would say that at this point, that is not the scholarly consensus. However, it is, so and I misspoke. Constantine was the one who made it doctrine that Jesus was born in a cave, but I actually think it was, Origen talks about it, but I think it was even earlier than that, like Justin Martyr, I think, talked about Jesus being born in a cave. But it wasn't official church doctrine until Emperor Constantine. Go ahead.
If you read Matthew, Jesus was specifically born in a house. And if you read Mark, Jesus...
Go ahead, keep going.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you read Mark, Jesus was not born in Bethlehem at all.
Yeah.
Jesus was born in Nazareth,
Yeah.
where he came from.
Yeah, and there really isn't a nativity story in Mark. There's just brief mention. Where we get the nativity story is really from Matthew and Luke. And so yeah, Matthew mentions a house, and Luke mentions Jesus being laid in a manger. And so what we see here, this is an example of what a house at that time would look like. And so when we hear there's no room at the inn, they did not have hotels like we have, like we think of now, right? So what we had upper rooms, and that's where guests would stay. And then you had the lower rooms, and that's where food was prepared, and that's where the animals stayed. Sounds really sanitary. And so what we see here is you can even see where the animals would have been, right? In this picture. Let me see, I think I can actually. So like right here. And so when they were saying there's no room, when we have that narrative, there's no room at the end, there was probably no room up here in the upper room where the people stayed. And then down here is likely where they stayed, which there would have been a manger. So, however, there is no mention of animals anywhere in the narratives. So that's kind of something that was added to our nativities. Any comments or questions? Thank you. Thank you for introducing that slide, Paul. That was perfect.
Thanks, Paul.
Next slide, okay. Jesus' birthday.
It's 25th.
It's obviously the 25th. Here's the thing about, like, I've read so many different things. Jesus was born this day. Jesus was born at this time. He's born during Passover. All of these different, I have no idea. I have not read anything consistent about when Jesus was actually born. But what is consistent is that he wasn't born on the 25th of December. And that is definitely a consistent historical fact. But I try, it's not something I would really want to get into simply because there really is not a good scholarly consensus about when Jesus was born. Go ahead.
If you're familiar with the Urantia book, it's a really thick book on Bible thin paper. It took a book study I was in 4 years to read it once a week. But he was born in August. Sorry.
According to that book.
Yeah.
And many different cults and religions have different time frames for when Jesus was born.
And I don't remember where this writing comes from, but I have read several writings about how a scholar would say that he was probably born in the spring just because of what you were discussing about the desert climate at the time.
Yeah, and that is again, there's such division when it comes to scholarly consensus that it's like, I don't think anybody really has a good idea. And there's a lot of that saying that. And the reason why I was reading a book that talked about how a lot of times back then they associated birthday with death day. So if somebody died on a certain day, that was the day they were born, right? And so that's why there really isn't a good scholarly consensus, is because we know that Jesus was crucified during the Passover, which is in spring, and so we have that narrative. But then in that one book, they were presenting a whole different argument. It's like, well, yeah, but what they would normally do is they wouldn't really look at birthday when they were writing it down. Their birthday would be their death day, and so that's probably that's a likely source for where that came from. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, is there any scholarly consensus on some of the stories I've heard about Christmas, the December 25th designation coming from being close to the winter solstice and Saturnalia and things like that, and trying to convert people with a pagan understanding to adopting this as a holiday?
And I don't know. I don't know necessarily if it was to try to convert. So what we have here in the 300s, we have an emperor, or the mid to late 300s. We have an emperor that wants to change the state religion. And so yes, we do know that the original celebration days for that state religion was December 25th. It was the solstice, right? So yes, I would say that certainly plays a major role in why December 25th is when we celebrate Jesus' birthday.
Just one thing that I looked at a couple days ago was that in two different calendars, and I can't tell you which calendars they were, that December 25th was celebrated as solstice.
Solstice. Oh, absolutely. Well, and it is the solstice.
Well, 21st officially.
Well, right. Okay. But no, yeah, I cool. Any other? Okay. Oh, Brenda has. Take your time, Kat, take your time.
I will.
We just had a text conversation about slowing down.
The other day I was watching Shepherd Chapel on TV, Arnold Murray, and he said that the main reason why they had December 25th as Christmas Day and Jesus' birthday was to, at that time, back then, that was when people come to the temples to pay their taxes at the end of the year and stuff, and they established that as Jesus' birthday so that they could celebrate all that stuff that they needed to do at that time of the year at that time.
Interesting.
Mark it off your list.
Right?
Put your hand over your shoulder.
Yeah, I still think this is, for me, the problem with, and I've deconstructed it. I've gone through this with blah blah blah. Is it completely misses the whole message? We do these exercises in order to entertain our mind, and our mind is what has got us trapped here. And so the whole message is being lost with what everybody's trying to deconstruct. And deconstruction doesn't matter. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's just at the same time, here we are, we're going to go back down this road again. And who cares what Constantine did? That was like 300 years after Christ's death. Both sides were wrong. Doesn't matter.
I mean, I would say it certainly still has a major impact on, religious dogma and doctrine and theology, and I would say even within the Unity movement, it still has a major impact on how we do things as well. Even the way we structure our services on Sunday morning, you can be traced all the way back to Constantinian Christianity. So,
yeah, I don't know. I'm just it just drives me crazy because I'm like, folks, we got to give this up. We have got to realize that there is a message out there, and each one of us needs to be carrying that message all the time. We don't need to be arguing with somebody over some Christian deconstruction. Okay, I've got people at the bus barn where I work at that, well, you know, everything's okay with what you're saying, but, you know, it doesn't, if it has anything to do with the Bible, we're all about the Bible. All right?
But the Bible completely.
Yeah, and you're like, wait a minute, folks, you need to understand, we have a brand new message every day. Every day is a brand new message for each and every one of us. And so we just have to we have to just stop. Nobody cares. They just like to entertain themselves.
I care.
I care.
Mary, did you have your hand up?
I did not.
You did not? Okay.
That one behind you.
Somebody, okay, go ahead.
For me, and I don't know if maybe for others as well, I think a lot of us have grown up in Christian households and gone to church and are very familiar with the traditional Christian interpretations of the Bible. And, well, Christian beliefs, whether they come from the Bible or not. And so for me, the deconstruction process is kind of like a step in my spiritual evolution.
Yeah.
You know, things that I had heard, you know, Jesus walking on water. And I think I had mentioned in a previous class about a minister being shocked when he said that he did not believe that Mary was a virgin. And I thought, how could you, as a Christian minister, you know, not buy into the whole story? And beginning to hear that, you know, well, these are stories, but, you know, they're not necessarily, you know, a historical account.
Right.
And so getting to that point of realizing that, you know, these are stories, that they don't have to be taken literally, and moving from there to, well, what is the spiritual message that's coming from this, rather than, you know, just go forward.
I think that's probably the most important thing about doing this. So it was okay that I wasn't a virgin when I got married. Oh my God. You know, it's evolution.
Sure.
We're evolving, all of us, to, Jerry, what you're talking about.
Yep.
And it's an ongoing process. And this is great, especially for people that are so worried about not being a virgin when they get married.
Yeah.
Etc.
Well, for a long time in my life, I thought that God was just, you know, this guy upstairs, definitely almost like a human being, just a little bit more powerful than a human being, totally focused on my genitals. Like that was it, right? You know, because that was the God that I was, you know, and I had to unlearn a lot of things, and that's to me that's what. What's that?
Was that during puberty?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's called. They even like coined a name for it. Purity culture is kind of how I grew up, and it can do a lot of psychological damage to people. Go ahead, Paul.
I think what I hear you saying, Jerry, and if this is correct, I totally agree with you. The bottom line is we should all be, really concentrating on devotion, on love, on forgiveness, on faith, on kindness, so on and so on and so on. And all of this other stuff is not irrelevant, but it's just kind of background. And what you're saying is, well, it's really important that you really know what the foundation of a lot of the writings are and what has been based on what we call Christianity now. If you ask a lot of Christians, I mean, they believed in slavery for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And we condoned doing horrible acts to other people based on the Bible. And we have got to deconstruct that.
Yeah.
To say, and I'm just using slavery as an example because there's many other examples of what, quote, Christians will do to other people in God's name now.
Yeah.
And you're right. We need to concentrate on devotion, love, and kindness, and so on and so on. But we also have to go back to what was the foundation here? What were they trying to do back then? What are we trying to deconstruct now?
Yeah. And I have just a quick question, just a survey. How many people grew up either in a Christian religion or heavily influenced by the Christian religion?
Here.
Okay, so that's all but one person. And so honestly, if that were not the case, I probably wouldn't be teaching a class like this one. To me, deconstruction is a way for us to recognize. Well, it's actually in my final slides, but we're just about out of time. So, and we'll get there. But we're all just making it up. We're making it up, you know. And we've been told this is absolutely fact. This is what has happened. But that was all made up too. And so to me, deconstruction gets us to the point where we're like, oh, if this was all made up, I can make up something that benefits myself, that benefits my community, that benefits the planet, I can make up something else that is inspiring. I can make up something that expands my capacity to experience more love and joy and peace on the planet. However, we can't really do that until we start to untangle all of the things that were sort of kind of put on top of us. And like I said, all but one person, raised their hand.
True.
I saw you. I saw that you didn't.
Jerry didn't raise his hand.
I didn't.
I didn't know you didn't have a Christian background.
Oh, well, I guess, anyway, the thing about my dad was really, really, really religious until I was about 5 or 6, and then the pastor hit on my mother, and that was the end of that.
Yeah. Well, and I would say 5 or 6. I mean, those are extremely formative years. Between 1 and 5, if you were 5 or 6, you were definitely influenced.
We probably moved 30 times in 5 years.
Yeah.
My dad followed like the wetbacks. He followed the vegetables, and he followed this, and this is what we did, and we went all the way up and picked apples, and then we come all the way back down into Silver City, New Mexico in 5 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would say deconstruction is broader. Deconstruction is about decolonizing our own mind. It's about this whole deconstruction movement is having a major impact on how do we end systemic racism in the world. Deconstruction is a big, major thing that is going on. And what's interesting is, so Derrida, the guy who kind of came up with this, philosophers during his time did not like him and did not like this idea of deconstruction. They kind of laughed him off as a joke. And I would say, in terms of the umbrella, I don't think I'm going to have enough time to do another comment. I apologize, because I want to get through the rest of these slides. But so Derrida was not widely accepted, and yet now we're 40 years later from him, and it is probably the most influential branch of metaphysics in the world today. And not everybody uses the term deconstruction, like decolonizing. A lot of what is being done in spaces that are talk about diversity or equity or inclusion, those are all deconstructing spaces. So I want to get through just a few more slides about the Nativity, because I promised we would do the Nativity today. So, Jesus was not named Jesus Christ. Christ is not Jesus' last name. It is a title. I know the way that Unity uses it. It's sort of like this inner reality. However, and I like that, by the way. However, Christ is a title that means anointed, and it was reserved for priests and kings. It was not really reserved for common folk like us. However, I love how Unity views the Christ, but it was actually used initially to show that Jesus was separated from everyone else, not like everyone else. So, and if you're interested about how we look at the Christ, I definitely recommend looking into it, because I like Unity's version much better than the original version. All right, so we had people visiting Jesus in the book of Matthew. We had the wise men that followed a star. We talked about the dreams and how those were dreams. We talked about the angels and how those were dreams. And then we had these 3 wise guys. So who were they? So this actually comes from the word magoi in Greek, and it meant magi. And magi were Zoroastrian priests. And the reason why the Magi show up in the text was to give authority to Jesus as Messiah. So this was a way to give. So we have Zoroastrian, somebody from a completely different culture. But now it's been just translated into wise men. Because we certainly, I don't know for sure if this is the reason why, but I think it's because we don't want to give Zoroastrian religion much credibility, and so now we just say wise men, right? But this would have been understood as wise men who were absolutely astrologers. Now, I don't think that the authors of the text understood astrology very well, because it wasn't, in the text it says that, and then the star was in the sky, and then it stopped right over that's not how astrology works, right? And so, but the reason why that was in the story was to offer credibility to Jesus as Messiah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there's the shepherds again. All right. Okay, so we had two political influences in the different stories. In Matthew, Herod heard about the Messiah from the wise men in the story, and so Herod was a king, and the wise men were saying, "Oh, this is the king of the Jews," right? So Herod went out and killed. Now, there's no historical basis for this, but in the Nativity story, Herod went out and killed everyone under the age of 2 or 3. I'm going too fast to even sit and think about it, but yeah, babies, essentially. And then there was an Augustan decree, but that was I wanted to put the political influence first, but that was up near when the original Mary and Joseph narrative started. They had to go but they had to go and pay their taxes. They had to be registered, essentially, and that was an Augustan decree. So that was the political influences in the story. In Matthew, Jesus' family had to flee to Egypt. I will get through most of the slides. Okay. And in both stories, they settle in Nazareth. And I want to go over just a couple of things that are common to our nativity story that aren't found in the Bible. And there's just two. The little drummer boy, not in the Bible.
Actually, he was sitting on the corner of Fremont and Sunshine last year.
The little drummer boy?
Did you see it?
No.
Oh.
It was a little kid out in his front yard playing the drums.
Nice.
At Christmas time.
And this is not in the United States, but this is a very common figure called Paganay in Catalonia. And there have been protests when they have removed this figure from the nativity scenes in that area. Just recently, major protests, and Paganay means the little Cooper. And
What's
so,
the origin? Yeah, why is he there?
So, within that region, nativities were very large. Nativities were a big deal, and so this figure was often found behind the shelter that they had for Mary and Joseph and Jesus. And it represented the human side of Jesus. Symbolically represented the human side of Jesus.
We don't do that here.
We don't have the little Cooper here, but I'm wondering maybe we should start.
It's on the back porch.
Yep,
Jesus on the shelf.
that's our version.
And so I wanted to close with why would having a deconstructive view? I think we already sort of answered this. I would say though it's because we want to take care of we're complex creatures. We want to take care of our mind, our body, and our spirit. And to me, deconstruction is more of a mental exercise that allows us to let go. And one of the things that I would recommend, just personally, since I'm teaching the class, I can do that. Is as you deconstruct, I would not, whether it's this or whether it's something else, I would not recommend trying to immediately find a reconstruction point for yourself. And the reason why is I've been in the metaphysical world. Well, first I was in Christianity, and then I was in the metaphysical world for 17 years now. And what I've noticed is that people will deconstruct something, but then they'll immediately try to jump to something else and jump to something else and so that if I just find the right book or process, I'll finally things will get better. And I love books, obviously. I love processes, and I love all of those things, but I also think one of the things that is so important for us in our spiritual path is to embrace the mystery. We just don't know. You know, and like I said that, you know, with deconstruction, what we're doing is we're sort of untangling these things to open up space. And there's a lot of revelation that we can find just in that space, just in the mystery of things. You know, I was, a few years ago, we did I was in a spirit group, and one of the questions that we had was, well, what is God? Who is God and what is God? And like, I really thought about it all week. I probably thought about it more than anybody else. And the only thing I could come up with was, I have no idea. But I know it's good. And that's what I mean by it's okay to embrace the mystery. We don't have to know all of the things. You know, and you know, one of the things that my teacher talked about a lot is all of the answers to all of the questions we will ever have, it's within us. But if we have so much mental stuff going on that if we're just constantly trying to find the answers on a cognitive level, we never get deep enough to really get into it. So to me, that's why I think deconstruction is important. Does anybody else want to answer that question really quick?
For me, when I'm studying for myself and I read things that I have that aha moment. Oh, well, this didn't really happen that way, or this did happen that way, whatever. I find what I consider to be the truths, and what I believe happened, what I believe is real, what I believe is history. It deepens my faith of who Jesus really was. Mm-hmm. Because we're not trying to so much put Jesus up there in the clouds like what modern Christianity would, but it makes him real to me.
Yeah.
And it makes him, what he did was absolutely spectacular, and it becomes real then. Mm-hmm. So it deepens my faith.
Yeah, mine too.
I think all of this is really beneficial for the involvement of the planet.
I agree.
I think that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. Because I know in our everyday lives, I know me personally, and I don't think I'm the only one, there's some stuff that rolls through my head like, I am right, he is wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's this junk that comes from old programming.
Old programming, yeah.
Unless you're talking to me.
See? There you go. He's a perfect example.
Way in the back.
My grandfather taught me instead of the word deconstruction, it's called rooting.
It's called, I'm sorry, say that again?
That's what I taught my kids.
Rooting?
Okay.
Rooting. Like rooting it out? Yeah.
Rooting. Yeah.
Going back to the roots.
Oh, yeah. And that, that is essentially, what we're doing. We're kind of getting to the core of things. We're getting to, and again, to me, the biggest deconstruction question is, well, why do I believe what I believe? Or why am I behaving this way? Or why, and you have to kind of search for the answer. And sometimes searching for the answer means, like this, deconstructing. I was like, well, why was Mary a virgin? That was when it was interesting. When I left, I didn't leave Christianity, but when I got kicked out of seminary, I had the American Baptist Church, which is actually very progressive. It's a very progressive church. They asked me to be a part of their church, and to share messages and stuff. And so I did that for a while, and then I had a woman she was constantly trying to snag me. And she asked me about the virgin birth. She said, well, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? And I recognized what ended up happening is I would answer a question, and all of a sudden the board would be asking me the question again. And so the answer that I gave to her was, well, I think if you've read all 4 Gospels and that's the only thing you're concerned about, you need to reread the 4 Gospels.
That's a great answer.
And guess what? The board never came and asked me that question, so it worked. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just always come back to my dog. My dog loves a ball. Mm-hmm. And it will chase that ball until I'm plumb tired of the dog chasing the ball. Until I get control of the dog, I don't know what to feed it. And so the more I see a lot of this stuff going on, is that we all have to ask ourselves, is the stuff we're feeding ourselves to try to deconstruct, does it matter? Because we do not have to go down that road. We can spend a whole lot more time finding the spirit and the love that's within each one of us without having to chase the dog.
Yes.
Right.
Well, isn't deconstructing just simply the act of figuring out what's the fluff and what's the actual roots?
That's up to you.
So therefore,
if you still want to do that.
Well, but that's
You
what I'm
don't
saying.
have
You
to.
kind of have, at that point, you would have to, because otherwise you're going to get a bunch of fluff and not know it.
I've chased that ball too long. I'm not
So-
going to deal with it.
Would you not?
I don't have to.
Here's a quote we didn't get to
I'm sorry.
by Catherine Turner that might actually answer this conversation. So, deconstruction is not the pursuit of an answer which marks the end of an inquiry, but rather the ongoing questioning that keeps our minds open to the idea that there may be an alternative views and understandings.
There's the answer.
And it is deconstruction that allows us to be open to other people's viewpoints, to be accepting of people with a different story, a different narrative. You know, to me, that's what deconstruction, that's another major thing that deconstruction does, is it allows us to be open to what other people might be experiencing. Deconstruction has allowed us to talk about, or to like be engaged in conversation with people of color and what their experience of life is like here in America. You know, it's actually this particular movement that has kind of opened up that conversation. It's opened up the conversation of like, what does it mean to, you know, be queer in America? It's deconstruction is not just about religion, but I think that religious deconstruction for me has been the most prominent. But it's not the end in itself, which was the first slide, which I know you weren't quite here for the first slide, but that first slide where we talked about this is not the end. What deconstruction does is it allows us to be open to a different conversation, a different possibility.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't at all, but you have to answer, because there's a lot of people that will chase down a road after something, expecting an answer, and they get lost in the search.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and that's why I said, you know, if you're deconstructing, sit with the mystery for a bit. You know, to me, I think that has been it's not what I did at the beginning. I constantly, I went from, you know, studying one religion to another religion, to another religion, to another religion, to another religion, and I remember one day I was just sitting there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is all, I don't want to say meaningless. I think I said meaningless at the time, but it wasn't necessary.
It was all fertilizer.
Yeah, but it wasn't. I mean, it's given me a lot of like head knowledge about stuff, but it really wasn't necessary for my spiritual development. Can we do the announcements? Can we pass the basket, and then we'll meet up in the back.
Thank you, James.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dee. I see your hand down.
I just want to say that these graphics are amazing.
Thank
You can move, here comes the shepherds. It's just,
Thank you.
You need to make a Mimi out of that one.
Do we have a microphone? Are you loud? Okay, she's loud. Never
You can
mind.
hear back there on this. You don't need it.
The Christmas potluck is tomorrow at 1 p.m. You can still sign up in the foyer with what food you want to bring. Please come early if you're able to help set up and decorate the room. Our annual Burning Bowl ceremony will be next Sunday during the celebration service. This is a time to reflect over the past year and release any thoughts, habits, or behaviors in your life that no longer serve you. Next Sunday at 9:15 in the New Thought World Religion Adult Sunday School class, James Masters and Jen Jones will present Ask Your Guides, Connecting to Your Divine Support System, Part 1. Our annual White Stone ceremony will be held January 7th during the celebration service. Would you like to start your new year by tapping into your infinite possibilities? Save the dates January 7th, 14th, and 21st. Freeman Payne will be facilitating the 3-week workshop, Infinite Possibilities, which is based on the best-selling book, Infinite Possibilities, The Art of Living Your Dreams by Mike Dooley. Freeman is an internationally certified Infinite Possibilities instructor and will guide you on a journey of self-discovery by challenging you to visualize your infinite possibilities and how to overcome the obstacles to achieve your highest potential. The cost is $25 and pre-registration is requested. The sign-up sheet is on the table in the foyer. We will do an all-church visioning facilitated by Sue and based on Dr. Reverend Michael Beckwith's visioning process. Through a guided meditation, we will open ourselves up to Spirit, asking, what is the highest vision for Unity of Springfield, and what wants to emerge as us? All are welcome to participate. Are you interested in becoming a member? If you've been attending regularly for at least 6 months and would like a membership application, please stop by the office. Now as our ushers come forward, we have the opportunity to support this ministry. Please join us in our offertory blessing. Divine love, through me, blessed and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive.
Thank you, God.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.